Most people don't know what's holding them back, but you do because you listen to me, Sam, your self-care guru and journal junkie. Welcome to Journal Entries, your safe place where you can tune in weekly to get tips, tricks, and journal prompts to uncover your feelings, gain clarity, and make your move. Hello, welcome to this week's journal entry. This week we have a special guest, Christina Cuevas. She helps divorced women fast track their dream life. In this episode, we talk about starting over and all that that means and what it feels like, how to tune in and listen to your inner voice, and how to go through divorce without overwhelm. But first, here's a little bit more about Christina. Christina's story isn't your average fairy tale. She defied the happily ever after crash and burn, transforming her own divorce into a springboard for financial mastery. Now she's on a mission to help women ditch the emotional baggage and build empires from the ashes, proving that diamonds truly are a girl's best friend, especially after divorce. With a unique blend of financial savvy and emotional alchemy, Christina empowers women to become CEOs of their own lives, leaving broke behind and rewriting their destinies in bold gold letters. She's a coach, a business strategist, a podcast host to the #1 podcast for divorced women called Rebuilding You, a dog mom, and a certified Drake fan. I know you're going to love her and everything that she has to say. So let's dig in. Welcome, Christina.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Samantha.
I was actually referred to you by a mutual friend, and she told me that you would be a great fit because you are divorced. And I have never had anybody on the podcast that is divorced. I've only ever shared bits and pieces of my divorce story. So I'm really excited to open this can of worms.
And connect. Yeah, I know. Divorced women unite.
So why don't we get into your story? Can you want to tell us a little bit about you and who you are?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you so much. So I'm Christina. I now work as a strategist for transformation for women who are going through divorce. And it all started with my own divorce journey and kind of landed me here in this role that I did not expect, but that's life for you, right? So in 2015, I found myself, it was like Christmas, and I found myself really, really in one of the darkest places of my life. And I had been really trying to keep a marriage together for the sake of the commitment that I had made, right? And wanting to make sure that I gave it my all. It was a failing marriage, and I had to make the difficult decision of it's either my sanity. I was having, thoughts of that I didn't even want to be here anymore. And because that's how serious I took my marriage. And it was either my sanity or I don't know what the alternative was. And so I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. And I really did not. I took that just as hard or as intense as the marriage itself, right? When I got divorced, I wanted to make sure that I learned the lesson. I was going through so many things of what could I have done wrong? And I joined divorce support groups. I don't know if that was part of your journey, but I had joined some divorce support groups. I did therapy, and none of my friends had been divorced before or had gone through a divorce. So there wasn't anything that I could really connect to. And the divorce support groups and the therapy, frankly, weren't helping me actually move the needle. It was just helping me cope. And I'm one of those people where I really want to make sure that every challenge that I face in my life makes me a better person, and that I actually evolve, and that I grow, and that I'm always learning from things and from experiences. And so I tried to find the purpose of my divorce and why this was happening to me. And I was just kept thinking like, I'm a good person. I know that like I didn't go into this thinking I was going to get divorced. Um, and the divorce process itself took longer than I was actually married for. It took almost 3 years to
My
get
gosh.
divorced. And this person, they say, I mean, there's, I guess, a joke. I don't know if you've heard this, a joke in like the divorce world that says you don't really know somebody until you divorce them because people get like
Yes.
really crazy about their what their reality is, I guess. And so, that was like really weighing on me where I was like, how could this happen to me? Like I did everything right. And so I couldn't find anything on the internet to like help me progress or help me, really like move the needle forward. And I remember like seeing a quote, or not a quote, but like a statistic online that said, there's already like the average United States couple, it's one out of every two marriages or three marriages ends in divorce, right? But then that rate actually increases to, I think you're like 70% more likely to get divorced a second time
No
after
way.
yeah. And so I was like, okay, so I'm doomed, right? Like I guess I'm just never getting married again because I do not want to be a statistic like that. But that just goes to, it told me that we aren't healing properly. We're not given the proper tools to help us evolve. And I think that's where there's such a big differentiation in why I decided like I want to document my journey because there all of the things that I was experiencing were just kind of keeping me like there and I still felt stuck. And I think that most people are just like, okay, I guess like they go through divorce the best that you can with the tools that you have, right?
Mhm.
So I just started documenting my journey and I started my podcast, which at the time was called Her Heart Heals Divorce Radio. It's now called Rebuilding You. And started, I had some old Tony Robbins notebooks that I had from a Tony Robbins event years before that. And I was like, I am going to do this. Like, I am going to make my divorce be the best thing that's ever happened to me, even though it feels like the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And so that's what I did and started, like I said, documenting. I started Her Heart Heals on Instagram. I started connecting with other women and then started coaching other women in their own journey and really being able to connect and just build a beautiful community of other women who are going through it. And it was such a lonely journey for me. It's so personal as well, which I think like obviously makes it so lonely. And so it's just been a really beautiful way to connect with other people in this intimate way and help them actually evolve versus staying stuck.
That is so powerful and so insightful too, to realize like the gap, right? Of what you're going through and what you're feeling and what's there, but also what's not there. And you're so
Mhm.
right. I remember when I was going through my divorce, I was not a part of any divorce support groups, but I was just scrolling Instagram for any sort of positivity and like
Mm,
encouragement and positive quotes and stats and whatnot. So I love that you like noticed that and like built something around it and that you documented like what you went through to get you from, where you were to from coping to like
yeah.
thriving. So
Yeah.
what would you say is like what are those stages from the moment of like you're getting a divorce and in the thick of it to like the other end?
Yeah. So I think the stages very much is all the stages of grief. as well, that you go through. But with divorce specifically, it's you go through first that shock of like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is my life. I guess this is like this new thing. Um, and kind of dealing with that. I always describe it as like, you know, in a marriage, they say it's to become one. You fuse your life, every part of your life with this other person. And so as two become one and then you get divorced, it's like learning how to live with your arm cut off and like learning how to function without your limb. And it's like, okay, I guess I just got to figure out this new normal now. Um, and so that's kind of the first piece of it. And then there's a lot of dealing with the heartbreak itself of the breakup and really dealing with that aspect of it, and healing from that piece. And then the legal process, of course, right, is a whole other thing, and what that does. And hopefully people are able to go through something like mediation where it's not as intense. But for a lot of us, it's attorneys, and it's, very heightened and aggressive words, and it's kind of traumatic in that sense. And so there's that piece. And then it's at that point, it's rebuilding your life. And I think a big struggle that a lot of my clients feel, and a lot of women in our community, is like this feeling of starting over.
Mm.
Okay. Because you think that like your whole life, whatever age you get divorced, is all of a sudden like in the trash, because
Yeah.
you're now having to start over, right? Starting from zero. And I think it's like also mourning the future that you thought that you were going to have.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of women, it also includes like their timeline of having children, if they feel that they got divorced and they were sort of robbed of that experience of having kids because, they're now at another age and they're starting over. And so now you have to like, and then it's going to take forever, and that now that ship has sailed. Or the starting over piece, I think, is like the biggest thing. It can be really overwhelming to feel that. And so, yeah, those are
Yeah.
all the stages.
Those are very accurate. I would say everything you said, I was like, yep, I remember that. I remember like the shock of it. Like even I felt the shock even before I told my ex-husband that I was gonna leave, right? Like once that
Yeah.
hits, like that
Mm-hmm.
hit different. And then I remember my heart physically hurting. I don't know if you felt that, but like
Yeah.
it physically hurt, but like also knowing that it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And then the legal process for me, we did start with mediation,
Mm-hmm.
and that was smooth up until I started asking for what I felt like I deserved instead of being like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
uh-huh, 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 because I was just like that person. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was attorneys, and you're right, that is when things people showed their true colors, myself included, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then starting over. I've seen you posting about starting over, and I was thinking there's also like what I was thinking of obligatory starting over. I didn't have to do this, but like starting over in a new house, right? Or sometimes new friends, truly new experiences or new things, but then also the optional starting over. It feels like it could be a fresh start for
Mm-hmm.
like, a better body, or like start
Yeah.
start making like healthier choices, or start the business, or even health, like start cleaning your house more or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that starting over piece becomes so overwhelming, right? Because of
Yeah.
all of that. It's like the emotional pieces of what you explained, but then the tangible pieces of like looking for the house, or the legal stuff. And then all the quote unquote fun things, but also it takes up our time and energy and whatnot. So
Yeah.
how would you help someone through that process of starting over?
Yeah. So I think it's like it's all about a reframe. I teach a lot of mindset techniques in my programs, and it really starts with reframing, kind of like how you said, like there's the starting over that is kind of like the not so fun, but then there's the starting over that is fun. Or you also mentioned like a fresh slate, which I think is like an optimistic way of looking at it
Hmm.
versus this like daunting thing. And I think like, so mindset is a big thing around how you're looking at it. And a big reframe that I start with everyone that you'll see me talk about on Instagram a lot is that it's not really it's starting over in certain aspects, but you're not starting over your life literally, you know? It's reminding women that you are still valid. You're still worthy. I think a big trauma that we go through in the divorce process, which I don't know if you experience as well, kind of sounds like it from when you went to the attorneys of like asking for what you felt that you deserved. There's subconscious traumas that happen in there where you are sort of fighting for to prove your worth. And that is like I think a big thing like going into starting over can sometimes also feel when you carry off the tail end of divorce and into the world of starting over, a lot of women experience like they carry on the fight of proving their worth. And I
Oh,
think that's
interesting.
what creates starting over as this really overwhelming thing, but it's about really shifting your perspective to understand that you already are worthy. You already are deserving of a beautiful life and you are fine just the way that you are. And so we're just starting from this point and taking everything that you've learned in your life and we're going to use that to step into this new version of you, which I like to call you 2.0.
Mhm.
And so it's really just taking all of that and shifting a perspective.
I love that because I have a lot of people that come, I shouldn't say a lot, but a handful of people that come
Yeah,
to
you
me
got your audience,
periodically
girl.
that have relationship issues and they are wondering if they should leave and if they should like make that decision to get divorced. And I think
Mm.
that the biggest thing is that starting over is like they feel like it's the right decision, but then suddenly it's like you just step out the door into this whole new world and it's like you get scared and nervous of like of who what you have to do and all the things that you had support with too,
Yeah.
when you did have that partner and all the new
Mhm.
decisions that you have to make. That was something that I found somewhat surprising is the decision fatigue that I had after
Yeah.
my ex left because I also have a son and I have him full time. And it
Mm.
was just like the tiny decisions of like, what should we have for dinner tonight? Or even like, where should we hang this picture in the house? Like things where I could easily just ask him and like he would give me some sort of feedback. But
Mhm.
now it's like all of that is on me. And so I had to really learn how to like ask myself and quickly decide so that it didn't become like so draining on me?
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to what you had said about women who struggle with making that decision to leave is part one of the reframes that we work on is that we have this little voice that's deep down inside telling us that we deserve better or that this doesn't feel right. And every time we don't honor that voice and we stay a little longer or we make an excuse for the other person that it will be better or that, you just got to stick it out. But anytime we don't honor that voice, we're essentially telling our inner voice, our inner child, our inner self to shut up, pretty much. And we get really good at doing that. And that's where the decision fatigue comes in. We do a lot of work on reconnecting with yourself so that you can know what that voice is, because it's from years of programming and conditioning of just not honoring our inner voice. And like there's such a disconnect between like with just within us, like between who we
Mhm.
are consciously and who we are unconsciously. And so that's a big piece of my work too, is like really being able to help you bridge that gap and develop a really solid relationship with yourself so that you never betray or abandon yourself ever again. Um, and it kind of stems from, I mean, with the women that I work with, we discover that it's even before marriage, we start to sort of tell this voice to be quiet.
Mhm.
But really in the marriage itself, we just tell ourselves to be quiet. And then it's hard because then we don't recognize, we don't even know what the voice sounds like anymore
Mhm.
after a divorce.
That feels really validating because for me, it was before marriage too. And I
Mm,
felt like bad about that. And like I was the only one that didn't listen to that little voice inside because it was there. But you're right
mm,
too, in that it's not always the should I stay or should I go voice. It's also the
mhm.
little voice that goes into, you know, defending them or like sticking up for them. I guess that's the same
Yeah,
thing, but
yeah.
like defending their actions
Mm.
and all those tiny things that they did that don't feel right, but you like make it up in your mind that that's okay that they did that or treated you that way. And those decisions too. And yeah, that's such a good point of like every time you do that, it's like you're pushing that little girl down or further away or something.
Yeah. And like that's how it also shows like how big of hearts that we have when we're putting our needs aside for the sake of this other person, even though these other people may have wronged us or, you know, treated us a certain way, and we just tell ourselves to stick it out for the sake of this other person. And that kind of goes into like why we make up those excuses or and I talk about this as well of like I think a lot of girls are society portrays sexy as like the bad boy, right? Like even in I don't know if you've seen the show Good Girls,
Hmm.
but like the bad like what was his name? Jesse Montana or whatever. You know who I'm talking about.
Yep, yep.
And everybody, and he was like the bad guy, right? And he did
Hmm.
all these bad things, but like we all were rooting for like kind of that love to work
Hmm.
out in some weird way, And so I think society puts a lot of like emphasis on the type of partner and what's acceptable and all of that. I think we're getting better, much
Hmm.
better as a society now, but like, even in like some of the music that we hear around relationships and all of that, and so we go into it thinking that it's like normal to experience bad behavior, and I think that just adds like a whole other factor.
That's so true. I know that one thing you help women with specifically is all of this, but in the sense of doing it without the overwhelm, because all of this, someone listening might be like, oh my gosh, that's so much to go through, so many things to do. So how do you make all of this not overwhelming?
Yeah, that's a great question. The very first thing is focusing on developing that relationship with yourself.
Hmm.
Just being able to identify what that voice sounds like, what that voice feels like. What does it feel like in your body? And, journaling really helped me a lot with that and asking the right kinds of questions. These are things that we don't journal enough to tap into what we're actually feeling because and we don't know. And so we seek this from like an outside perspective, again with like the decision fatigue of like you tell me, we're asking for external feedback so that we can go and do things, and And so when we develop that connection with ourselves, it makes things so much easier. It brings back our worth. It makes us as our own cheerleader. And one of the biggest things I think to kind of complement that is your habits. It's your daily actions of what you do.
I love it. That's great. And I love that you mentioned journaling. This podcast is journal entries, and I journal a ton. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any journal prompts, or do you remember anything that you journaled about to tap into those feelings? Because you're so right. And like I shouldn't say it's a pet peeve, but it is when it's like Google journal prompts and it's so basic, and you have to get like deeper and like beneath that surface level to truly
Mhm.
understand what you're feeling and where it's stemming from, and there that will tell you what you want to do. So do you have any journal prompts that were really helpful for you?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I don't have anything specific, but I will say, like you kind of touched on it a little bit right now, because it's really about checking in with where you are and building, I call it like a survival skill, really, of like when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling lost or like you don't have the answer, really developing a practice to stop and check in with yourself. So I feel like if there's any journal prompt, the most important is, how are you feeling right now, really?
Yes.
And writing and seeing what happens. I'm a big fan of like stream of consciousness writing, um and just kind of seeing what comes out. But I think like another prompt would be, after you answer that question, is why,
Mhm.
and getting curious. Why do I feel this way? Where might this have come from? And really like leaning into that curiosity. It's almost like when you go on a date for the first time and you go and you meet somebody and you're like really excited to get to know them and you want to know all these things, like, ooh, tell me, and tell me where you like, all the details. We want to know it all. And so we have to just kind of act like that with ourselves and be really curious of how we're feeling and like really going deep. And that can really unveil a lot.
Mhm. I love it. That's perfect. I call it prompting myself, and that's exactly how I do it. I just start off with like, how am I really, right? Not like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
good. Like, no, truly. And then
Yeah.
just like the how, the why, the where, like the real, like I keep asking, like, is that really it? What am I making this mean? So yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
Very helpful. So
Yeah.
if people want to see more of your awesome content or work with you, where can they go, and like what programs and offerings do you have for them?
Yeah. I've always got some kind of class, some kind of free training. So you guys are welcome to check me out on Instagram. I'm at Her Heart Heals. And I've always got some stuff going on.
Awesome. Well, for everyone listening, I will put all of the links and even the journal prompts and whatnot in the show notes. So take a peek there. Otherwise, Christina, thank you so much for hopping on. It was so refreshing talking to you and almost like therapeutic, just like hashing it out and reliving things.
I loved our conversation. Thanks, Samantha.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's journal entry. I love connecting with my listeners, so make sure you screenshot this episode and tag me on Instagram at samantha.s.says so I know you're listening. And don't forget to grab your free training and journal prompts at www.samanthapenkoff.com/podcast.